Great. Okay. Well, I'll introduce myself. My name's Hilary. I work for My Wild City along with Ellie. We both work for the Wildlife Trust, and Rhianne's joining us today from Black Girls Hike because we've talked about lots of different sorts of wildlife, haven't we, Rhianne? And we thought we'd do a talk on signs of spring, the sort of local signs of spring that we've all been looking forward to and that we've all been spotting over the last couple of weeks and hopefully in the weeks to come. So My Wild City, the project that Ellie and I work on, is based in Manchester, and it's all about improving nature in Manchester and also about trying to connect people better with nature in Manchester. So we're bringing nature closer to people, but we're also really wanting to bring people closer to nature. Thanks. So here we've got an aerial view across Manchester, right across the city. You know, when you look at this view, what do you think of? You think of Manchester, you think of the shops, perhaps, and the music, perhaps the football, but very few people think about nature. And it's not usually your first thought when you think about what's Manchester famous for. But in fact, nature is really important in the city. And when you look at this picture, you can see there are lots of trees. What you can't see here is, of course, the rivers and the canals that run through. They're like the blue corridors running through the city, and they're really important for wildlife. And one of the things that we're working on with Manchester City Council at the moment is a local nature recovery network. So the idea is that we look after all the spaces that are really good already for nature, but we link them up, and we link them up using people's gardens, using the parks, the grass verges alongside of the roads, the grass at the edge of industrial estates, the street trees that might be along your road. All these are really important corridors. So we need to make them all as good as they can be for nature. So that's one of the things we're concentrating on at the moment. So when you think of something like, you know, like the Metrolink map for Manchester, what we're hoping to do is, if you imagine a nature map for Manchester like that, where all the different species and all the different habitats can run through right across the city and across the city region, really, down from where Rhiane is in Bolton, right down through to Cheshire and across from Wigan and out the other side into Tameside and the hills of the Peak District. So we can make sure that nature can spread everywhere across the city. Thanks. And here we are, signs of spring. How we all really needed to see spring this year, didn't we? So we've got 3 pictures here of, they're all woodland bulbs, because of course, when you think of flowers that come up in early spring, they can't sprout from a seed because the seed wouldn't have enough energy inside it to produce flowers right early in the year when the soil's so cold. So lots of early flowering plants are bulbs. And we know, of course, on the bottom left there, you've got the daffodil that we really know, because lots of people plant them in their gardens, don't they? They make everybody cheerful. I've got some pots outside my front door, and I smile every time I see them because they're just so cheerful. As well as buying them in garden centres and planting them in your garden, of course, they are native. You can have a native daffodil to woodlands and woodland edges here in Britain. The native daffodils tend to be a bit shorter, a bit sort of lemony yellow, and they're just one variety of daffodil, whereas we know we can buy lots of different varieties of daffodils, and they're all really great to see. I do like a daffodil. So those, everybody recognises those. I think we've got those on the bottom left. The purple flowers are crocuses. Now, there aren't any native crocuses in this country. So I think they all came from, I think, the Middle East and North Africa, China maybe. I think crocuses grow in the wild there, but they were brought over to this country, introduced, and now they're planted in lots of parks. They're a really valuable food plant for bees. So and butterflies, any early pollinators that come out, they need nectar, and crocuses open up in the sunshine. Those flowers obviously aren't in the sun and they're not quite ready, but when they open up in the sunshine and the bees can go right into them and feed. They're very low growing, often planted on the edges of parks, sometimes on grass verges, really great. And then on the right, oh, sorry, I was just going to talk about snowdrops, Ellie. I haven't talked about snowdrops because they're so great. Have you, I don't suppose you have, if you're in the market for buying snowdrops, you'll know how expensive they are. Again, there's one sort of native snowdrop to this country, and they grow sort of woodland edges. Yeah, the edges of woodlands between the grass and the deep woodland. You'll find the snowdrops. They're the first flower to come out really in about February, sometimes a little bit earlier depending on the weather. And they are really delicate. They're like little nodding bells, quite low down. And yeah, there's one native variety to this country, but the snowdrop breeders breed all these special varieties, double varieties, and ones that are taller, ones that are shorter, ones with more green, less green. And apparently single bulbs are now selling for hundreds and hundreds of pounds. It's really hard to buy all these varieties of snowdrops without spending an awful lot of money. I think maybe lockdowns played a part. I think we're all getting very keen on gardening, and there's obviously a very keen snowdrop group of people, but again, really good food plants for bees and early pollinators. Thanks, Ellie. Okay, so what is spring? Well, you know, we're in spring, aren't we? What's actually happening? So obviously the Earth's moving around the sun, it's spinning in a bit of a tilted position. So at different times of year, we in the Northern Hemisphere, above the equator in Britain, Northern Europe, are either closer to the sun in spring and summer or further away in autumn and winter. So now we're closer to the sun. So for us, the days are getting longer, which is just brilliant. It's not even dark yet, which is fantastic, isn't it? So the sun's higher in the sky, it's getting warmer. So the soil's warming up, so things can start growing, and the bulbs, the seeds can start to germinate. And of course, because as people, we're all part of nature as well. So we feel more cheerful. There's, you know, I bet there's very few of us that actually think that a nice sunny day on a nice sunny warm spring day doesn't make us feel more cheerful than a dark, cold, rainy winter's day. So we're all connected, aren't we? And I think, you know, as I said before, I think this year we've been especially grateful for spring, but it's a brilliant time to go out and about exploring. You know, online talks are a great way of sharing information with lots of people, but what I'd really, really encourage you all to do is, probably not after this talk because it'll be dark, won't it? But as soon as you can, as soon as the weather's a bit better, just go out and look for some of these things. Just go out and enjoy yourselves, because that's what it's all about. And the spring is springing for all of us.
Oh, Hilary, we've got a question.
All right.
It says, do you know when crocuses were introduced to the UK?
No, I don't.
Difficult.
No, I don't, I'm afraid. They've certainly been with us a long time. I know some bulbs were actually introduced to this country, like, you know, centuries and centuries ago, but I don't know with crocuses. And they have sort of naturalized because they're now so common. You know, we think of them as part of the woodland flora, and they certainly don't cause any problems. They're a benefit, as I said, to bees and things. But no, sorry, I don't. Somebody can look it up for me. Thank you. Okay, so one of the great things about spring that I really love is the birds start singing, and I know they're singing earlier and earlier. So if you're a bit of an insomniac like me, you can hear them probably at about 5:30, something like that at the moment, and they'll just carry on getting earlier, won't they? I know somebody asked me why birds sing so early, and one of the schools of thought is that it's the male birds that sing, and of course all the birds have been asleep and not able to eat all night, So in the morning when they wake up, they're at their weakest. And whereas I go downstairs and get a cup of tea, what the male bird does is start singing as loudly and for as long as possible, because they're showing the females that they're the strongest, they're the fittest, they're the best to mate with, because they can carry on singing even though they haven't had any breakfast. So that's what they're doing. And they're singing to start defending territory and to attract a mate, because of course spring is the nesting season as well, isn't it, for birds? So this is a great tit. I expect a lot of you have seen one of these on your feeders. I know Rhiane was talking about all the bird feeders you've got at the moment. I don't know if you get great tits on them, but this is a great tit. And you know, when I first started being interested in birds and bought bird books, obviously they had to describe what bird song sounds like. Obviously now you can get an app and you can actually listen, can't you? But it's always quite funny looking at books to describe bird songs. So great tits are described as going teacher, teacher, teacher. That's what they're meant to be saying. That's what it says in the books. I don't know if we can we play a great tit, Ellie? I think we've got a clip to play one.
Let's do it.
Yeah, let's do it. See if it is going teacher, teacher.
Bear with me while I click on everything known to man.
Okay. Yeah, well, you can make up your own mind. Do you think it goes teach, teacher?
I feel like it's saying PQ, but in a real high-pitched way.
Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, that's a great tit, and you will have heard them because they are common, and they're singing loud and clear at the moment. As I said, defending their territory and thinking about mating. Great tits stay with us all year. So they're here for the winter on our bird feeders, and then they find holes to nest in. They nest in nest boxes if you have any of those. They're very keen to do that. So yes, they're a common garden bird. Okay, Ellie? Thank you. Now, this bird isn't a common garden bird, but whereas some birds stay with us all year, some actually migrate, and this bird is called a chiffchaff. And in the autumn, it migrated, it left Britain and Northern Europe and flew south over Spain and North Africa, across the Sahara, and it overwintered in countries south of the Sahara. So a huge journey for thousands of very small birds. And of course they migrate because they're insect eaters. So they can't find the food in the winter in Northern Europe. So they head south, following the insects, and feed up and then head back. And what date are we on? We're mid-March, aren't we, at the moment? 14th of March, right? I'm hoping for my first chiffchaff in my local green space. I'm saying in the next 3 days. They're on their way. I know they are, and it's the sound that so cheers me, because it's like another proof that spring is happening. And the chiffchaff is actually named after its song. People think it goes chiff chaff, chiff chaff. So I wonder can we play this one, Ellie, and see if it is going chiff chaff?
Yes.
Yeah. In Germany, apparently it's called a piff paff, because they think it goes piff paff, piff paff. So. Yeah, it's got
Very
two
cute.
notes, hasn't it? What do you think, chiff chaff?
I don't know. It definitely sounded different to the last one, but I didn't get chiff chaff.
No, no, no. I think when you know it's called a chiffchaff, you just think that's what it sounds like because that's what you know. And it's a bird you won't see it in your gardens. It prefers sort of maturing woodland, really. So there's more around here than there used to be because I live near quite a lot of old tip sites that were planted up with trees in the 70s. So those trees have got big enough now to attract lots of chiffchaffs. So yeah, I'm looking forward to their arrival. Okay. Okay, we've come down from the trees. Obviously, this is our common mallard, a really common sight in parks, in lakes, in ponds round about the urban area. I don't think we'll play the sound of a mallard singing because I think we're all familiar with that. We don't even call it a song, do we? We call it a call, really. Mallards are really, really widespread ducks. They range across the sort of temperate, not the tropical regions of the world, but the temperate regions of the world, all across North America and Northern Europe and over into Asia, in China, very widespread indeed. If you go into the parks and you're going to feed them, by the way, please don't feed them bread. If you can feed them bird food, bird seed, it's much better for them. And here you've got a picture of two males and a female. Now, in the breeding season, people often call this a pair and a spare, because what happens is you can see the female is much more camouflaged than the male. And obviously she's camouflaged because she spends all the time sitting on the eggs on her nest once they've mated. So she doesn't leave the eggs once they're laid. She just sits there. So she needs to be really well camouflaged because obviously otherwise predators are going to come and eat her. So she has to blend in with the background of the vegetation at the edge of the lake or wherever they've decided to nest. But the males can be much brighter. So females are much more likely to be predated, and so there always ends up with more males than females. So of course, when it comes to the breeding season, you have the males looking for a limited number of females. So hence you often get the pair and a spare. But the females are amazing. They lay about 12 eggs. They lay the eggs every day, every 1 to 2 days. And the female loses about half her body weight during that process. So, you know, they have to be pretty strong females to sit on that nest and just sit there. And of course, the male, once they've mated, their job's done. They don't take any part in the raising of the ducklings. And mallard ducklings are one of the cutest baby birds you can see. It's always a real pleasure to see those on the streams and lakes and ponds round about, isn't it? Okay. And here we've got another water creature that I bet you're all familiar with. It's our common frog. Now, these frogs are getting less and less common, to be honest. They may be called the common frog, but they are completely dependent in the breeding season on ponds. And in agricultural land, ponds have been drained in huge numbers. So more and more frogs are reliant on garden ponds. So if you possibly can, if you're lucky enough to have a garden and able to have a pond in it, do think about creating a pond, because these frogs are really lacking in this habitat. They only need ponds for the breeding season. The rest of the time, they're in amongst the vegetation, the rotting wood, the long grass, underneath hedgerows, feeding up. But in the breeding season, they do need water to lay their frog spawn. And again, you know, we talked about the mallard laying a lot of eggs. Well, the frogs can lay up to, I think it's around 4,000 eggs. So 4,000 bubbles of frog spawn in one go. Now, obviously, most of this frog spawn doesn't survive. Otherwise, we'd be completely overrun with frogs, wouldn't we? It takes the frog spawn about 12, 14 weeks to go from what you can see here through to what's called the froglet, which is the tiny little frog that emerges from the pond with its back legs. and its front legs as well at that point. So quite a while, but I know there's frog spawn being seen already. So I think we're in the middle of frog spawning season, really. So yes, if you've got a chance to find some and have a look at it and see frogs. Frogs are mostly active at night. Oh, and another interesting fact about frogs that I only found out recently was that to swallow their food, you see their eyes are sort of bulging. They push their eyes back into their heads. The eyes retract, and that helps push the food down their throats. So there's a fun fact about frogs anyway. I'm so
it's interesting, isn't it?
It is. I know. And you can see the way their frogs are, the frogs, their eyes are standing up. I guess it does just go straight into their throats, doesn't it?
So
Yeah.
So would you kind of get the same thing from a toad as well? And would they have like toad spawn or frog spawn?
Yeah. Toads also spawn. They instead of laying big clumps, their spawn is more stringy, and it's often around submerged plants in a pond. But it's a similar sort of thing. And toads they need ponds. Again, they need ponds for the breeding season and just spend the rest of the time out and about. And the difference, I mean, frogs are really, really variable in colour, and they hop. And of course, as toads have got more sort of warty, dry skin, and they walk around rather than hopping. So you can probably tell the difference. They just look drier, whereas frogs their skin always looks wet. They breathe through their skins as well as through their mouths. So yeah. And what was it you, Rhiane, talking about Miss Trunchbull and the newt?
And then I think it might. Oh yeah, when I was saying that I want to see more stuff and I want to see a newt.
Yeah. And because of that film. Yeah. Great. Oh, and it's it's coming. I'm sure it's coming up to World Frog Day. I'm sure World Frog Day's next week, is it? So I think we should all. I think it's the 20th of March. I think we should all try and see some frogs around World Frog Day. That'd be great.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Yeah. Okay. And yeah, let's go and see a frog on World Frog Day. So if you can get pond dipping, and especially if you've got children to take pond dipping, then it's a great way to spend a bit of time. It really is, because it's a whole underwater world out there. So just make sure you do it safely. Obviously go with them, take a pond net, take a tray of some sort, maybe some old ice cream tubs, yogurt pots, something like that, to empty your catch into. Have a little bit of water in your tray and empty your catch into the tray so you can look at them clearly. Make sure anybody who's pond dipping, especially children, are either kneeling or sitting down, because our heads are the heaviest part of us, especially children. And the temptation, if children see something in the pond, just to lean further and further over with their heads going first is can be a danger. So make sure they're sitting down, make sure that they're very gentle with the creatures, because all these creatures are quite easily hurt because they're outside of their habitat once they're in a net. But yeah, enjoy yourself, have a great time looking for things, because as I said, it's just it's a brilliant underwater world for everyone to explore. Okay, back on land again, and back to another spring bulb, the bluebell. Now, bluebells aren't out yet. They're coming out more in late April, probably another 5 or 6 weeks. So you can see the leaves at the moment. They're a bulb and a flower that's associated with older woodlands in this country. And in fact, they're nearly half the world's bluebell population is in this country. So it's not very widespread at all. It's associated a lot with British woodlands. You do get places where they've been planted, but there are some lovely woodlands in Greater Manchester that have bluebells, and I recommend a walk there in April and May. I know there'll be some of the Wildlife Trust nature reserves, won't there, Ellie, which which are especially good for bluebells, and I know they'll be recommended on our website because they are such a delightful sight. And also, if you get a big mass of them, they have a really lovely scent. They're really great, again, a great flower for bees and butterflies. Thing to remember about them is they can be really easily damaged by people trampling across them. So at this time of year, before the flowers come up and you can just see the leaves, if you walk across the leaves, what you're going to do is you damage them, and then the leaves can't photosynthesize and make all the food they need to make sure that the bulb survives to next year. So you can actually, places that get trampled can actually not have any bluebells in future years. So look at them and enjoy them, but don't walk over them is my recommendation. Thank you. And I don't know if you're familiar with this, but it's wild garlic, also known as ramsons. And what you'll notice at the moment is, and again, it's a woodland bulb. All these things are things that grow in deep, flowers that grow in deep woodland often want to flower before all the leaves on the trees are out, because you know how dark a woodland becomes in June, July, August, once all the leaves are out. So the flowers want to get up there first while there's still some sunshine. So at the moment, these flower in May, so you won't see them looking like this at the moment, but you will see the leaves coming up. So you'll know they're there because even walking past them, sometimes you can smell of garlic. And certainly if you picked a leaf and rubbed it in your finger, the smell of garlic is really, really strong. Again, another plant that bees love. And lots of people are going foraging more. Again, it's not just lockdown, it's just people exploring their local countryside more. And do forage them because they are strong. You can use them. I know people have used them for pesto. I know somebody else who used them to flavor some bread. I'm sure there's lots of recipes that you can look up and make all sorts of things with wild garlic. But just a couple of things. Check that all the leaves you pick are wild garlic, because sometimes other plants come up in amongst the wild garlic, and the smell of garlic might be so overpowering you just assume it's all garlic, and it isn't. So check it's all the same to make sure you don't come to any harm. But also just take 1 or 2 leaves per bulb. Don't strip a whole area. Leave some for wildlife, and make sure you leave some for other people as well. As I said, it's getting more and more common. But yeah, just take a leaf every so often so that you're not clearing an area and damaging the bulbs for next year. But yeah, do have a go, and quite easy to identify by smell alone. Thank you. And here is another edible leaf. We're off the ground. This is a shrub, a bush, a hedge called a hawthorn. It's not flowering at the moment. It's another name for it is called May blossom because it blossoms in May. It's also called quickthorn. It has the red hedgerow berries that the birds love so much in the autumn. But at the moment, before the flowers come out in May, it's just got these remarkably sort of fresh, shiny, green looking leaves. They're just completely fresh, that lovely green that you just get at this time of year. And you can eat them. People say they're really great in salads, but they are definitely edible. I know hawthorns are traditionally a symbol of fertility. I've never eaten a hawthorn leaf, actually. Well, I have eaten a hawthorn leaf, but I never actually managed to taste it or get any taste from it. But I did read that somebody said it tasted nutty. So yeah, again, take some. Don't strip a bush bare, but do take some and pop it in your salad, apparently. Okay. And here's another bush that you'll find growing around hedgerows, in gardens, in parks. This is a catkin from a hazel tree. And you can see the picture on the right is just, at this time of year, they are just a mass of catkins, really, really pretty. And the catkins themselves are the male flowers. So they're producing pollen. And if you get in amongst those branches and twigs on a hazel bush, what you'll see right close to the twigs, close to the branches, is the female flower, which is tiny and has a few spindly sort of red thread-like, really delicate little petals. And it's really, really easy to miss it. So you have to get right in, look really closely. And these are the flowers that then become, well, if we're lucky, they become the hazel nuts in the autumn. And we all know that squirrels and mice and everybody goes mad for hazelnuts. We don't tend to get them so much here, but I know down in further south in England, hazelnuts grow much more strongly. So you'll get the nuts there. But they are a really good plant for butterflies, and a really good plant that grows in amongst the woodlands. It's a woodland edge plant. So look out for it at this time of year for the catkins. Thanks, Ellie. Oh, and here's something that we're all familiar with. I bet everybody knows what this is the young leaves of a stinging nettle. And these are, believe it or not, also edible. So you'll need to pick them while they're still very young without their stings, or put a pair of gloves on to pick them, or pinch them very hard, stops them stinging, doesn't it? And you can do all sorts of things once you've picked these. Apparently they're really full of vitamins, really good for you, full of protein. Obviously people drink nettle leaf tea, don't they? I remember once I was told that you could make soup with nettles. But then I also know that the woman who was telling me how to make this soup was telling me how much double cream and how much butter to put in. And she said you had to put all these amazingly rich ingredients in, because otherwise the soup was pretty unpleasant. And why didn't we just go to Asda and buy spinach soup or something else? That was her recommendation. But again, give it a go. Again, don't take all the nettles. Everybody thinks nettles is a bit of a weed, and I agree, they are a weed, but at the same time they're a vital food plant for lots of caterpillars. So some of our most favourite butterflies, things like the peacock butterfly and the small tortoiseshell butterfly, their caterpillars are reliant on nettles growing. So don't take all of them, but yes, do try and eat them if you'd like to. And I know another use of nettles is the fibres in them are really strong and tough, and they've been made into cloth in the past. And I don't know whether there's any cloth production from nettles at the moment, but I know people are looking for more sustainable fibre production away from cotton, which is so intensively produced. So maybe in a few years we'll all be wearing nettles, who knows? Okay, and what are our animals up to in spring? I bet lots of you are familiar with urban foxes. Well, of course, they're giving birth in spring. That's what the female foxes are doing. Coming, yeah, probably this month, next month, they're giving birth. And the foxes, the cubs stay in the den, which is in urban areas, could be under sheds, under buildings, at the back underneath garages. And the cubs stay with their mothers in the den for about a month, and the male foxes bring food all that time to keep them fed. And then they all emerge in July, about July, June, July. And that's when, lots of people, sometimes you're lucky enough to have fox cubs in your garden. I know lots of people really like that, because the cubs play and they learn what to behave by playing, and it's delightful to have a family of foxes in your garden, although some people aren't so keen because of course they do dig up lots of your plants and flowers as they're playing. I was told the other day that there's been some research recently into the skull shapes of foxes, and there's a big difference. There's a difference emerging between the skull shapes of urban foxes compared to rural foxes. And rural foxes, as you can see the picture on this one, they have a very narrow, quite a fine nose and skull, and that's because they're predators and they're catching live prey, whereas urban foxes, who are likely to be eating discarded kebabs and chips and things that they've scavenged from bins, are actually getting wider and wider jaws because they're eating a variety of food that's, well, they don't need to kill it, it's already dead. So they're adapting their whole skull shape, which I thought was very interesting.
Ooh.
Okay, yes, amazing. So I have to say, these creatures you're less likely to see in certainly in Manchester, in the city centres. I know once you're out into the more rural parts of Greater Manchester, you stand more of a chance. This is a stoat, and you can tell it's a stoat by it's very lovely rusty on top, very white underneath, and that black bushy tail at the end. You won't find them in gardens, and you generally won't find them in parks unless they're, on the edge of wilder areas and wilder parks. They're very cautious as well. Even though they're quite widespread, they're quite a vicious predator. And even though they're active in the day and the night, what they do is they hide up and hide away, waiting for prey. So even though these stoats are about 30 centimeters long, roughly, they can kill animals that are much bigger than them. So quite often they kill rabbits or even bigger prey. They've got really, really strong jaws and can move very fast. So even though they might be out and about, we're much less likely to see them. And of course, people often ask how they tell a stoat from a weasel. And weasels are tiny, absolutely tiny. It's hard to imagine how small they are. You might often just see a flash of brown. If it's very tiny, it'll far more likely to be a weasel. There's some story goes that a weasel can fit through the size of a wedding ring. I can't believe that's true because they're not that tiny. But they also are incredibly fierce and will tackle and catch animals to eat that are much bigger than them. But I know the last time I saw a weasel was it must have had a home in a sort of crumbling brick wall at a pub that I was just coming out of. So that was obviously quite a long time ago. But okay. So the insect signs of spring are also really, really important. We talked about how the flowers are important for the bees and the butterflies. So this is a buff-tailed bumblebee. There's I think there's 250 species of different sorts of bees in the UK. And some of them are out in early spring, but not that many. So the buff-tailed bumble is one of them. You can see its tail is a kind of buff colour, and lots of the other bees arrive and appear much later on when there's more variety of food available and better quality and quantity of food. But what's happening at the moment with bees is you've got the queen bees emerging from their overwintering nests. So they come out first. They're 2 or 3 times the size of a usual bumblebee, so people often get completely spooked by these massive bees, especially because they need the sun warmth to be able to move around. So they're often moving around quite slowly on the on the very early sunny spring days, and they really need to feed. The first thing they need to do is feed. So all those crocuses and snowdrops are absolutely vital for these bees, and any plants that you got flowering in your garden as well. And the rest of the colony has died off during the winter, during the autumn and winter. And once it's fed, this queen bee is going to go off and choose a nest spot in some sheltered area. It could be in vegetation, in long grass. It could be, you know, in some behind some twigs at the bottom of a hedge, wherever it thinks it's going to be sheltered. And it collects pollen and takes the pollen into the sheltered area, its new nest, and then lays some eggs. And then what will happen is those eggs hatch out as larvae. The larvae grow and turn into bees, which then become the worker bees, which then go out and feed the colony. And the queen then doesn't leave the nest. The queen will spend the rest of the summer just laying eggs, and building up the colony. But it's really, really important that we don't damage or hurt any queen bees we see flying around, even if they are a bit dozy at this time of year, because obviously that's a whole future colony we could be damaging if we did. Thanks, Ellie. And you might have seen one of these flying around. I think, was it last weekend or the weekend before, that had quite a lot of sunshine? This is one of our butterflies that overwinter as a butterfly. So it's called a peacock butterfly. I think, you know, it reminds people of a peacock's tail, those eye patterns on the wings. And as we said before, the caterpillar feeds on nettles. And in summer, you might see these butterflies on your buddleia bushes in your garden or out and about in the park. And these are very long-lived butterflies. Each of these butterflies can live nearly a year because they overwinter as a butterfly, as an adult butterfly, and then they can come straight out. That means that they've got the advantage of being able to come straight out in the spring when the warmth of the sun is first on them. Okay, and we've got another butterfly, I think. Yeah, this is, I think this is my favourite butterfly. Here it is feeding on a bluebell. It's called a Brimstone Butterfly. Now, it's widespread across the country, but it's not really, really common. So that makes me more delighted to see them. And it overwinters as an adult. It finds sheltered places underneath branches, in the crooks of trees, around buildings, to overwinter as an adult. And the male is much more bright yellow. And this is where people think that the name butterfly came from, one of these brimstone butterflies, because the whole, you know, it looked like butter flying because they're bright yellow. So that's what the story goes anyway. They're you'll see them in bigger parks, in woodland edges, gardens. The caterpillars are completely dependent on one sort of bush called a buckthorn bush. And I think the reason that these butterflies are now more widespread is that there's been more planting of these bushes, which is a great thing. Some caterpillars, like the peacock, would feed on nettles, which are widespread anywhere, but yes, this one is completely dependent on one sort of bush. But I am looking forward to seeing my first brimstone. I haven't seen it yet, but I'm hoping it's soon anyway. Okay, well, that's a little trip through some of the signs of spring. So we'd really, really love to see your signs of spring. If you've been out and about and been able to see any signs of spring, could you share us with them on social media? That'd be really great to see. And thank you very much for listening.
That was brilliant, Hilary. Do you know, you're so knowledgeable. I was literally sat there like, wow, I can't believe she knows all this stuff. But I have a question about, I don't know if it's a silly question or not, but it's about bees and beehives and wasp nests. So you know how you said that bees sometimes, like, she would just go into the grass and make a nest? So what would that nest look like? And would it be totally different to how you have like beehives and like where they're making honey?
Yeah, honey bees are I've never actually looked inside a beehive itself, but the honeybees are very different to the bumblebees. There's all these different sorts of bees. So the bumblebees will be making a nest, and it'll be, like I said, it'll be in a sheltered spot where the queen's just laying their eggs. So, and then they have a whole colony of worker bees just feeding that bumblebee. So it'll be, I don't know, it could be like in an old nest box. They'll use a sheltered area or underneath a wall. Or can you think of any other examples, Ellie, where there'll be bees will be nesting?
I think sometimes have you said like old burrows, like old animal burrows, like rabbit burrows? They might use that as well. Yeah,
they need to be sheltered from the weather, but they don't make anything. They're underground or away from the weather and sheltered, but just with their food sources and the worker bees and the queen bee laying the eggs. And then, as well as those bees, you get the native solitary bees, which just, as the name suggests, just live on their own. So they don't have a colony of workers. So then they just have their own burrow that they go in and out of, and you know, it's a different lifestyle again. But yes, and honeybees are separate to that, aren't they? But I've never looked inside a beehive. Have you? I don't know how it's organised.
Oh, interesting. That's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think I'm going to go pond dipping next week.
I hope so. Good. Yeah.
So I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah. If you
let us know what you find.
A sunny day, a bit of warmth on the water, and then everything's a lot more active. Yeah, really, it's really, really good. Yeah.
Probably one of my favourite activities to do is pond dipping. Just hours of it, seeing what you find.
Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Hilary. Sorry that my audio was a bit strange at the start. It seems to have fixed itself now.
You're fine now.
Just in time for the end. So great. That's wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us, Rhiane. And obviously people can find you on social media as well. So don't know if you want to.
Yeah, you can follow us on Instagram at bgh_UK or find us online at bghuk.com.
Fantastic, fantastic. I don't think there are any more questions, are there? But I've popped our email in the chat. So do feel free to send any questions your way. Either myself or Hilary will be able to answer them, or one of our conservation team will be able to. But yeah, with that, I think that's everything, isn't it?
Just go out and enjoy it.
Yeah, go out and enjoy it. So thank you so much, Hilary. Thank you so much, Rhiane. Thanks to everyone for joining us. Really hope you enjoyed it, and enjoy what's left of your Sunday and start planning trips to go out and enjoy spring.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, everyone.
Bye. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.